All right. So, how do we actually become an online launch manager? If you're a virtual assistant or if you're a service provider who's been working online and you heard about launch management and it piqued your interest, you could be in one of two boats, right? You could be like, wow, I'm really curious about that. That sounds amazing. I definitely want to, you know, research and find out what that might look like. Or you might be in the other camp, which is like, that sounds really intimidating. I have no idea what I don't know. And how do I develop the skill set to become a launch manager? And so, what I want to say to you is that if you've been working in the online space as a virtual assistant or as a service provider, it's very, very likely that you already have the foundation of the skills that are needed to become a successful online launch manager. So, I wanted to talk through what some of those skills are that you may already have, as well as some of the skills that you may not have or that you may get to hone to have a successful career as an online launch manager. So first things first, I kind of think of virtual assistant or service providing in three different areas. I think of it as like people that have technical skills, people that have administrative skills, and people that have creative skills. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a ton of overlap between all of these things. I'm highly creative. I love to write. I love design. I love to make things beautiful. I'm also very adept at administration, communication, organization, and I'm highly technical. I've built sales funnels, I've built websites, I've done automations and integrations. So there's overlap to all of this. So you don't need to identify in a single one of these buckets, but I think it's important to look at if you are really skilled in one of those areas or all of those areas, the skill set that you already have that you can bring to the table as a launch manager. So when we talk about technical skills, so if you're someone who has built landing pages, who builds out funnels, supports integrations, does things like email marketing campaigns or automations, if that's your skill set, you already have two really important foundations that are gonna make you successful at or can make you successful as an online launch manager. The first is detail orientedness. So I think my experience anyway is people that are highly technical are very detail oriented. There's a lot of details involved in tech and automations and integrations, right? It's a puzzle and figuring out how everything fits together and all of the little pieces that work together to make the thing function, right? This is very detail oriented. And as a launch manager, detail orientedness is really important. Launches have a ton of moving parts. Now, even if they're really simple, right? It's not just how many moving parts there are, but it's looking at a detailed level at how to make sure things are being executed really well. So if you're someone who's technical and you have a high level of detail orientedness, that's going to serve you really well in a launch manager role. So the second skill that I found really transferable from people that have technical skills into launch management is problem solving, right? Technical people, very often you are the troubleshooters, right? You're trying to unwind the puzzle, right, after it's been created and figure out where the gaps are. And that makes you an amazing problem solver. And I don't even want to say problem solver, but I like to kind of say opportunity seeker because I don't consider problems like, problems kind of have like a really negative connotation to them, but really any mistake, error, breakdown, those are all opportunities for learning and for making things better. So I like to think of them as opportunities instead of problems, but that's a nuance we don't need to go too deep into right now. But as a tech person and someone whose brain can unwind those things and figure out where the gaps are, you become really adept at problem solving. And as a launch manager, it's really important to be proactive and forward looking, seeking out those opportunities, thinking about the things that could potentially become problems and getting ahead of them. And also solving problems in the moment, right? Clients that work with launch managers, well, really with anyone, they want problem solvers. They want people that are going to come to the table with a solution. So, if that's part of your skill set as a technical person, then that's going to serve you really well in the launch management role as well. Okay, let's talk about administrative roles. So people that are in administrative roles, and this is very common with virtual assistants, right? You're doing things like calendar management, you're supporting email management, maybe you're doing client onboarding and client success and communication. There's two skill sets that you're typically really strong in that are going to help make you successful as a launch manager. The first one is organization, and this is huge. Launches that are not well organized are very inefficient and they tend to leak a lot of time, money, and energy, which is why people get really drained out by launching. So, having a launch manager or being a launch manager and having that organizational skill set is really crucial. You're going to need to be organized in the way that, they're laying out the project plans, in the way that we're communicating with people, in the systems that we're setting up. And so that's really key to being successful in a launch manager role. The second skill set is communication. I Some of the best communicators that I've worked with are administrative people because they are multitasking, talking, and communicating with multiple different levels of people within an organization and outside, and outside context, right? So they're communicating between the client, meaning their client, the coach or the consultant. They're communicating with the clients of the client. They're communicating with vendors. They're communicating with the bookkeeper. They're communicating with different team members because they're like very often the hub, right, of the implementation that's getting done. So having that strong communication skill set will serve really well in the launch manager role because again, it's very highly reliant on people. You are not going to be running launches and being hired as a launch manager if you're working just with one client. Typically, you're liaising with agency owners, with consultants that are being brought in. You're liaising with the team, the client. You're figuring out communication systems for the people that are coming, that are following through the launch. So that's a really transferable skill as well that I found from administrative roles into the launch manager role. And then finally, creatives. Creatives are some of my favorite people to work with. You all are so out of the box thinkers, and really intuitive. And so the skill set that people that work in the creative field bring to the launch manager role is that curiosity, that flexibility, that out of the box thinking. As a launch manager, you really do need to be flexible, right? Something that's a priority one day, there may be another thing that becomes priority the next day. When you are working with people and there's breakdowns, you need to be curious about why that happened to help solve the problem. When you're going through launch strategy, you don't want to just be thinking like, okay, we're going to do the same launch strategy over and over again, and we're never going to think twice about it. Although you may rinse and repeat launch strategies, you want to be thinking about what those opportunities are and get creative with the solutions and creative with the strategies that are going to knock that launch out of the park. So that's something that creatives really bring to the launch process when they become launch managers, I think is really crucial. So let's talk through some of the other skills that you may need to be successful as an online launch manager. So, one of the biggest parts of launching that's really supportive to making a launch successful, and not just the launch that like the client's actually going through now or that you're facilitating now, but future launches, is metrics. And so, metrics is something that some people are like, I want to run in the other direction. Some people love it. I know people that hated math but love metrics now that they're working in the business space. So it's kind of like you either love it or you hate it. But regardless, it is important and it's a key part of the success of a launch is understanding metrics. So if this is something that you don't have a skill set for yet, then it may be something that you want to invest in learning and or I want to mention as a launch manager, I incorporate metrics reporting and analysis into my services because I enjoy metrics. I enjoy analyzing. I was an accountant by trade. So I worked in accounting for 8 years and, went to school for accounting for 5 years before that. So I love numbers. I love data. That doesn't mean that as a launch manager, if you don't enjoy that stuff, that you have to include that in your services. However, it is really helpful to understand, at least at a high level, how metrics are important to a launch and how to lead another team member around like being the data person on the team. So I've worked on teams where we actually had a data person and they were the person that were collecting the data. They were coming up with the systems to track the data and report on the data. So on that particular team, that wasn't me. But I did still need to have an understanding of how we were tracking metrics, how often we were reporting on them, how we were gathering them to make sure that they were a part of the launch process. So another skill set, if you don't have it yet, that you may want to think about learning or honing in on, if you do, if you are familiar with it, are funnels, right? And so every launch is essentially a funnel, right? You're taking people through a funnel, trying to get them from, awareness all the way to a buying decision. So if you don't understand funnels from a conceptual nature as well as a technical nature, that may be something that you want to dig deeper into, because as a launch manager, again, it's not that we're the people that are building the funnels or anything like that, but we need to understand the process so that we know the right questions to ask and the right people to ask to make sure that we have a solid funnel that's taking people through the launch process to have successful sales and build successful revenue from based on our launch goals. And finally, the skill set that I want to mention is processes. So building processes and maintaining processes. This is really well, and I think of systems and processes together, but sometimes when I say systems, people think of tech. And for me, systems are kind of all of the things that come together to make the thing work, right? So I typically sometimes I'll refer to them as processes because I think that creates a clearer picture in someone's mind of what I'm actually talking about. But systems and processes, let's couple them together, are really important to understand when you are a launch manager, because one of the biggest pain points for people when they're launching is that drain of energy, is that drain of time. And that happens when things are not efficient. And inefficiency happens when we don't have systems and processes in place. So you want to think about things like, the systems and processes that are going to support a launch and how you as the leader of the launch can help to facilitate those processes, understanding what those processes are, how to create systems out of those processes, or processes out of those systems, maybe is the better way to say it, and develop processes that are repeatable for things that are recurring in a launch, and develop systems for the things that maybe aren't, so that everything's a little tighter, a little more organized, a little more streamlined. And as you start to do that in each launch, they become more streamlined and more efficient, and they become easier and easier. And that's how we eliminate that pain point of the drain of the time and energy, is through those systems and processes. So I hope that gives you a good idea of some of the skills that are really supportive when you are transitioning or growing into a launch manager role.